and I'm just observing, and I thought this was all nice, but I have my faith. I knew what I believed in. The turning point was the fact that for the first time in my life, during the testimony meeting, I felt the Spirit of God.
Welcome to a bonus episode of YouthCast. Today we're sharing a conversation between Brother Lucas Martorana and Apostle Frank Natoli about Brother Frank's experience meeting the Church of Jesus Christ as a young man and the impact that your testimony can have in the lives of the people you interact with. Check it out.
Brother Frank, welcome. It's great to see you. It's great to have you.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Let's just dive into this as part of our topic. So your upbringing was in the Catholic faith.
My family is all Catholic, and I went to Catholic school. So, I was, you might say, ingrained or indoctrinated in Catholicism. Like for many people, this is a faith that your family follows, and so did I. I went to the Catholic school and really followed that path for, as I said, many years until I was 19 years old. Yeah. And we can probably talk about it a little bit later, but when I was 19 is when I first visited the church. Mm-hmm. And that really became, a huge turning point, obviously, in my life and since then. But, leaving the Catholic faith had implications with my family. And there was, there were challenges there. And I was a young man making my own decisions, but yet it affected my family. And it affected a lot of, I inherited the brothers and sisters as my family, but my natural family struggled with me being no longer Catholic.
Was there anything that you observed or that you kept from that practice, or were there anything that you learned from that upbringing that you brought into your spiritual life in the Church of Jesus Christ?
Yeah, that's a great question, and there are things, and I think it's true for many faiths, right? And it's really about kind of your sense of dedication. Because, I was all in. I may have been a young man, I was a child and grew up, in that way. But here I'm 15, 16, 17, 18 years old. I was all in. Even when I had doubts about things, even though I had questions, I was all in. I went to the Catholic church every Sunday, or a Saturday night was an option. But I went religiously. I was. So I think that perspective, you can take away from anything, really, from any faith. As a child, I was, taught to pray. When I would go to bed at night, I'd say my prayers, kneel down side of my bed. My mom and dad would be there. When we would have a meal, we always had a word of prayer together as a family. As a family, we all went to church when I was younger. And my dad made us sit in the front of the church building. Yeah. So here's my older sisters and my mom and my dad, and we had to sit in the front. And that was that kind of appreciation and respect for putting God first was prevalent.
Very cool. And I like what you said. Like there was a respect and appreciation for that upbringing, because it is easy to bash and get into bashing other churches and other faiths, but there are positive things from every walk of life, or every interaction with, faith and the practice of believing something that you can take away. So you had this upbringing in the Catholic faith. It gave this unique foundation that you were able to take good things from. You, at some point, you met the church, and at some point you mentioned this sort of tension, this conflict with your family, and, Scripture talks about that. And so tell us a little bit about just sort of how that took place.
I attended out of, a relationship that had been established with friends who were members of the church, and they invited us to come. And I say us, it was my girlfriend and I at the time. Mm-hmm. And so, okay, I wasn't looking for a new church. I wasn't looking, in fact, all my life, this is all I knew. And so I really wasn't in that searching mode. So I attend with my girlfriend, and, we attended Sunday school. In the Catholic faith, there was no Sunday school because I had gone to the Catholic school. So I was done with my catechism kind of stuff, so there was no Sunday school. So I thought that was kind of nice. You got to study the Word of God. Interesting. Well, what do my friends do? They put us in the front pew. right? Now imagine bringing a visitor first time, and you walk them in and you put them in the front pew. They sat with us. It was Brother Bob Batson, Sister Ruth Gennaro. She eventually became his wife, and they were friends of Sister Kathy and I. They invited us to come. They sat with us, and we sat through the morning meeting. Now, the Niles branch in Niles, Ohio at the time had 2 meetings. So we were there for lunch. Sister Carmel Gennaro, she gave us a nice egg and pepper sandwich, homemade bread. Oh, this is great. Had a meal with the brothers and sisters. Then we had an afternoon meeting. Yeah. There was feet washing that day. I mean, it was like, a marathon meeting, hours.
Yeah, fully immersed.
Yeah, and it was all fine and well, meaning I was just kind of paying attention and observing. Yes. And by the way, the church building was nothing that I was used to. I was used to a cathedral, and this was an old meat market deli.
I was going to say, I think it was a grocery store.
Yeah, I mean, it was an embarrassing building. No matter how you dressed it up, it was just not a good building. But, so here I'm sitting there and through the morning meeting, and I'm just observing, and I thought this was all nice. No real negative judgment, but I had my faith. I knew what I believed in. And what the turning point was the fact that for the first time in my life, during the testimony meeting, I felt the Spirit of God. And there's the differentiation between the Catholic Church, where I had never felt the Spirit of God. I didn't even know what it was. I had no concept of it. When people would be on TV crying in evangelical-like meetings, I thought that was all fake stuff. People don't cry in church. That's not real. Yeah. That was my thought. And so here in the testimony meeting, Sister Ruth, our friend, stands up in front of everyone and says, well, I want to thank God that Frank and Kathy came to church today. And this wave of something came over me. In hindsight, it was this sense of humility of why was she thanking God? Like, why was I so important? Why was this what's the big deal? But this wave came over me, and I began to cry. Now, I'm 19 years old, and I'm a tough guy. Ain't nobody can see me cry, right?
Yeah.
And now I am literally weeping uncontrollably because of the Spirit of God that had come over me. Well, now, first-time visitor comes to the building. He's weeping. My girlfriend's crying. Sister Ruth is crying. Many people are like, wow, what's going on here? And so it was just so overwhelming for me that I was convicted. And there were manifestation of the gifts, visions, the word of the Lord. Just all of this was new to me. I had no clue what any of this was. Yeah. But all of it confirmed by the Spirit. And I walked out of that building that late afternoon after sitting through witnessing feet washing, crying again, not understanding any of this stuff, but just feeling so convicted that I'd found the pearl. I had found something I didn't even know existed. And so literally from that day forward, I had no desire to go back to the Catholic Church. And I said, okay, what do I need to do? I mean, I was so naive. I didn't even know that baptism was part of the equation.
Yeah.
I didn't know enough to say, I'd like to get baptized. I had never read the scriptures. So unfortunately, I went home that night. I was still living with my parents, 19 years old, and I told them everything that I had experienced. They had no clue, no understanding at all. Now I became like an immediate zealot. Now I'm excited. I heard the Lord speak today. Oh, they looked at me like I had 3 heads and, like I was crazy. Yeah. What do you mean you heard the Lord speak? Now, I didn't know much how to explain it other than this man who was sitting in the congregation stood up and spoke with such power, thus saith the Lord. They looked at me like I was just crazy because I just pummeled them with everything that I had experienced, and they had no point of reference. In hindsight, I wish I had been a bit more patient, and a bit more sensitive to them and how they would react to this.
Well, and I appreciate that honest reflection in the sense, like looking back on it now, there is some ownership. Probably in the moment you felt like, they're not listening to me, or, I'm beating my head against the wall. Like, I've had this awesome experience with God and they're not even open to it. And that, like, I could see that. Before we dive more into like how that progressed, for where you were in that place, like, you weren't searching, you weren't curious, you weren't really even like that knowledgeable about the church. But the thing that sort of got you there was that relationship with that sort of trust, like, hey, if it's important to you, I'll come with you. Am I understanding that?
Exactly right. I mean, so to go back to that time, it's Friday night, and we did a double date. So here's Bob and Ruth and Frank and Kathy, and we went to the ground round. This is when you still threw peanuts on the floor.
That's awesome.
So yeah, so we're having dinner, and just in conversation, we would double date a lot of times because we were friends. And they said somehow Ruth got to talking about her church. Okay, something came up. Now we both know we're looking for those windows of opportunity to sneak in a little something about our church.
Sure.
I was naive to that. So you can talk about your church? Oh, okay. So she began to say, things like people speak in tongues. I had no idea what that was. No idea. Visions. No idea. What do you mean visions? People see things. Like, really? So some of it was just odd to me, a little curiosity. And ultimately they said, well, do you want to come to church with us? And so you're exactly right. I mean, if I didn't know who they were and they were talking that way, I would have been like, no, why would I want to subject myself to that? But I had respect for them. I liked them. They were my friends.
Yeah.
And so if this is important to you, it's part of your life, okay, yeah. Why would you lead me astray? I have a relationship here, and it's a good one. And we had known each other for a number of years. I met Bob when we were in 9th grade. So we were best of friends, In fact, yeah, he was my best man at my wedding. I mean, he was my best friend. So if my best friend invites me to, okay.
Yeah.
So it was really about the relationship and the willingness to say, sure.
Tell us a little bit of what happened next. You mentioned barging in, telling your family you had this wonderful experience. I could imagine it was tough.
They were tolerant. I mean, they at the end of the day, it wasn't like I was doing something terrible.
Yeah.
It wasn't like my life was going, south. I was involved deep into sin. I wasn't doing drugs. I wasn't drinking. I was with God-fearing people. So it wasn't a negative thing in that respect. It was more of a hurtful thing for my family, especially my mom and dad, who their own, expression later to me was, we did the best we could. We gave you everything we had. And it was almost as though I had rejected it. Right. So, and as I mentioned earlier, in hindsight, I never gave that a thought. I never put myself in their shoes. That's one of probably the biggest lessons that I've learned. When you talk with someone, whether they're your family, whether it's someone you have a great relationship with, or you don't know very well, if you can understand where they're coming from, you're going to be a lot better off, right? If you're going to have a topic about religion and discussion about our church, well, if they're a Baptist, you know something about the Baptist faith, that might give you an appreciation of how they might view our doctrine. If they're Muslim or Hindu, whole nother story, right? It's just about Jesus at that point, right? So understanding where the other person is, looking at it through their eyes, putting on their set of glasses and seeing how this is going to transpire has really been something I've tried to do. Not always successful, but tried to do. And I didn't do that when I was 19 years old. I was just dumb and naive, I guess. And ultimately, about 3 months after I'd first come, we came to church at the end of July, and both Sister Kathy and I were baptized in October. So just a few months later, and by the way, this was the first weekend we left Niles, and we actually went to Lorain, Ohio. We went there for like a weekend conference, a little mini conference. So we spent the night overnight at the Alessios. They gave, and I got to tell you, I was so, to this day, I remember being so impressed, because here's a perfect stranger We go to Brother Jim's sister Betty's home, and I was with another brother. Brother Brian Martorana was with me, your uncle. They put us in their bedroom. They gave us their bed. And I thought to myself, this family doesn't know who I am. And they gave me their bed to sleep in. I woke up in the morning and the table was full of food. I mean, homemade bread, and Brother Jim made bread, and you name it, eggs and cereal. Like I'd never, my family would do that for me, but I never knew anybody else who would do that. Well, that Sunday, we asked for our baptism. Came home from Lorraine. First thing I do when I go tell my mom and dad, guess what I did? I got baptized today. Same zeal again.
Yeah. And
probably for the next, 7, 8 years, it was a struggle because they saw the good in me that this brought, but they felt that distanced kind of sense of I'd given him my best, but it wasn't what he chose. He chose something else. Mm. And then one day, and at this point I'd already moved to New York. I was living in New York, got family working there. One day, an old priest who I knew growing up when I was in the Catholic school, my family knew, stopped by to see my dad. Oh. And he asked, and he said, how's your family? Fine. And he remembered me, and he said, how's little Frankie doing? Well, I'm not little anymore. And my dad almost embarrassingly says, well, he lives in New York, and he's no longer a Catholic. And the priest, who my dad respected, said this to him. He said, everyone is searching for something. And if he's found it, God bless him. Hmm. Well, when the priest said that to my dad, it lifted the burden from him. It was as though he was released, like, I guess it's okay. Oh. And after that point, my mom and dad especially, I think, began to feel a lot more comfortable with the decision that I had made.
When you put yourself out there, when you share the church, it could be received, they could come, it could be exciting, it could be somewhere I'm not sure, or it could be no thanks, and even could be harsh. So how did you handle rejection as a young person? How do you sort of handle that?
That's a great question, because rejection, it's a reality. And I don't think there's anybody who's never been rejected, right? In one way or another, whether that's you apply for a job and you don't get it, right? Whether you ask a girl out on a date, right? She may say, no, I'm not interested in you. That hurts a little bit, right? Nothing wrong with me. Why, right? Or things at work. A lot of environments where I think we face rejection, and learning to deal with that is important, not just in the spectrum of the gospel, but just broadly. Because and this is, for me, this is how I deal with it, and this is how I have dealt with it in the past. For me, I'd like to think about the rejection that Christ received in his life, and how did he deal with it, right? And the truth of the matter is, it hurt him. It hurt him. And so I think it's okay to be a little bit hurt by that, to be affected by it. I feel bad if I invite someone and they come once or twice and then they stop coming. I feel bad, because I've found that pearl. This is the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. You can find salvation here, and they come for a while and then they stop coming. And then I'm calling them on the phone, then they stop returning my phone calls. And they're not rejecting me. I could personalize if I wanted, yeah. But if anybody else called them, they wouldn't be coming either. So there's a balance there. I think it's okay to feel a little bad. And the reality is we're going to be rejected in life. But the truth is as well that Christ understood that. And I think he helps us kind of build up our strength around that. And I don't think I figured to myself, if they rejected Jesus, if they slammed the door on Jesus, should I expect anything less? Because I surely don't walk in the door and am not Christ. and they rejected him.
So powerful. I love that reminder, because that's, we say Christ is our example for everything, and so many times we associate that with love and positive traits and teachings and parables and life lessons, and then it's also the negative life lessons. And so what you're saying, to sort of sum it up, if I had to, is, first of all, it's easy to take it personal and feel hurt, but try not to. And the other part was that, remember that Christ went through these things, and so we expect, okay, that's part of life. That's part of the gospel. It's part of, our calling. And then the third part, as you mentioned, was you develop that strength, you develop that resiliency of when you have an experience. I mean, I remember, as you mentioned, dating. I remember, first time I asked a girl out, she said, no, I'm never going to ask a girl out again. I'm never going to talk to a girl. I'm never going to get married. And you get rejected one time, and your emotional response just goes, I'm never going to have that experience again. But if you let God work with you, you remember these things, you develop resilience to say, okay, that one slides off my back. I'm not going to let that take my energy, take my focus. So great comments. Are there other advices, other thoughts that come to mind for you when sharing the gospel specifically to people outside the church?
Well, I know in preparing for this conversation, you sent me a couple questions, and one of them was around presenting the Book of Mormon. Do you present the Book of Mormon right out of the box, or do you wait, right? And my answer is yes and yes. I think it depends, right? I mean, bottom line is you need to be led by the Spirit to know when you want to and what to say. And the Lord tells us, I'll give you the words that you need, but you have to rely on me. So it does require us being in tune with the Spirit. And if you're going to invite them to church and they say yes, well, you better make sure they know about the Bible and Book of Mormon, what we believe. You better make sure that they know you're not going to be offered the Lord's Supper. I mean, those are some basic things. You might want to explain to them, and if someone's sick, they're going to go forward and they're going to be anointed with oil. So you got to kind of provide some point of reference and some explanation. If you're having a conversation with someone and they're not going to be in church tomorrow, I don't know that it's critical that you have to present the Book of Mormon in your first conversation with them. I mean, the concept of the gathering of Israel, the concept of the brass plates and Joseph Smith, that can be a lot for someone to swallow who has no concept of it at all.
Yeah.
So to me, it really goes back to two things. One, and we talked about this earlier, the relationship, right? Develop a relationship where then you can share with them practically anything, and they'll look at you and say, oh, you believe that? Okay. Yeah. It has some credibility with it.
Yeah.
And the other thing is understand where they're coming from, right? So I mentioned earlier as well, if I'm talking to somebody that I work with who's Hindu, the Book of Mormon, has no real bearing in the conversation. The first conversation is about the fact that I believe that Jesus died for us. He was a man, the Son of God, born, died, resurrected. I mean, that whole concept, you've got to get way past before you say, and I believe in the Bible and the Book of Mormon. So to me, it's about understanding who you're talking with and where they're coming from before you just say, oh, I've got to give you the Book of Mormon right now. I got to give you all the facts. I got to tell you about the Restoration in 1829 and, give them numbers. And, that's not necessarily what they need or what their viewpoint is. So to me, it really is about understanding, and the Lord can inspire you and direct you to know that, because you don't always know every detail about them. And here's a cute example of a woman I worked with for a number of years. She's from India, and we'd gone to lunch a few times as a group, went to an Indian restaurant, introduced me to Indian food, love it, great food. And so, I work with her a little bit, and now it's around Christmas time. I go over to her desk and she has a little nativity scene on her bookshelf. Now I know she's Hindu because she spoke to me about some of the Hindu gods that she prays to. Yeah. And I said to her, okay, you're killing me here. Why do you have a baby Jesus on your desk? And she started laughing. I said, help me understand. You're Hindu. I know you are. Now at this point, she doesn't know anything about church or, right. And she looks at me and she said, I just think Christmas time is such a happy time. and it causes me to think about nice things. And I said, and that was my door, right? And so I said to her, there's more about that baby Jesus thing than just nice times. And so it led to a conversation. And so, to my point is, I didn't know exactly where she was, but when I saw the little nativity scene, one of those little miniature plastic ones that are like, you can get for $1 with little fake, little glitter on it kind of thing. It's sitting on our bookshelf. I thought, why does a Hindu have a nativity scene? It just begged the question, right? So to me, having that relationship with her, where I was able to, not necessarily jokingly, but I approached it in a manner it's like, okay, help me understand this, as opposed to I have to tell you about the Church of Jesus Christ because you need your soul saved.
Yeah.
And the neat thing about my own testimony is that after that first day and kind of witnessing and feeling the Spirit of God for the first time, when the brother said, and now I knew that the church believed in the Book of Mormon. I'd never read it, but I knew about it. Didn't bother me. I didn't really care, I guess. Yeah. Because I wasn't interested, right? After that, like the next day, when the brother said, now, we believe in the Book of Mormon, might have been your dad who said that. And I was like, whatever you tell me, I'll believe. That's how convinced I am today. Like, give me the book, let me start reading it. Yeah. So it wasn't about, I wonder if he's going to accept it, even though, because I felt the conviction of God's Spirit. Here's a book, we believe in this, it's the Word of God. Okay, I'll read that because it must be. Because what I felt today, if you tell me this is part of this organization and this faith, then I'll follow that.
Very cool.
That's where we ultimately want to get to as a people, right? Yeah. And that's what we pray for when we invite someone to come to church to feel the Spirit of God. That then it doesn't become about how well I can convince them of the Book of Mormon or this doctrine or that, but rather let the Spirit of God work on them and let them hunger and thirst for that.
Yeah, that's great. And such a thread of our discussion today, and you brought it out again very eloquently, and it is a great story, is the relationship. Your relationship with God and the Spirit allows you to discern when and how much to share, and your relationship with people allow you to just be in tune and that genuine interest, to observe the nativity scene, to have a joking, way of bringing it up, and then saying, hey, I can share, this with you. So very, very cool. I want to be mindful of the time. We'll go towards wrapping up, but I do have to touch on this. Many times at GMBA campouts, seminars, different meetings, it's a space that young people are free to share. And we hear that from them. The burden of their heart may be something heavy, maybe something with life or family or addiction, but many times it's just, I haven't felt the Spirit of God in a long time, or I haven't felt it strong, or I haven't felt it consistently. What would be some of your best practices, some of your best, solutions to reconcile that?
Well, I want to show the Lord, because it's His Spirit, by the way, right? It's the mind of Christ that He gives us, that touches us. If I want to show, we'll use a natural example. If I want to show my natural father, hey, Dad, I want this. How bad do you want it? How much is it? How important is it to you? Well, it's so important that I'll wash your car for you. I'll do this. I'll do that. I'll demonstrate my desire for what I want so that you can give it to me, because He holds, in this example, the keys to whatever, maybe the car. If I go to the Lord and say, Lord, I desire to feel your Spirit, not just to camp out, but more often when we go to a worship service, when we're singing in church, or when I'm just praying or singing maybe at my home, I desire to feel more of your Spirit. Well, how are we showing the Lord that we desire that? We can't just, one time every week for 3 minutes say, okay, Lord, where's your Spirit? Bring it on. Yeah. And then go back to all the natural things that we do, or worse, involved in something that's sinful. I mean, that you can't just then turn on the faucet and expect water to come out of it. It's not going to. So I think it's about demonstrating to the Lord our sincerity, because if we truly want that, then I'm going to try to walk as best I can after His teachings. Yeah. And I remember doing that as a young man before I got baptized, and because I felt like I wanted to show the Lord I'd do something. I want to give Him something back for what He's already given me. And it's that continual kind of relationship, right? And so I remember saying things like, I know I've been swearing. I'm going to stop swearing. I'm going to stop doing certain things. Kind of lame in some respects, but it showed an effort on my part. And I felt like the Lord repaid me for that. Now, how did that always come? Was it, well, I didn't swear today, so where's my blessing? It wasn't always a 1-for-1. It was a commitment. I'm going to try to stop doing that. I'm going to try to do more of this. Maybe it's reading. Maybe it's not swearing. Maybe it's right. But I think it's about showing that effort. And sometimes it isn't reading. Fasting is an effort. So you say, well, you fast. It's hard to fast all by yourself. It's a lot easier when somebody else is doing it with you, right? So you find someone else, maybe that's a mentor, maybe it's just a peer, to say, well, let's just skip one meal today and let's talk during lunchtime instead of not eating about things about church, things about God, whatever, right? Just to take some time and to focus on that. I think when we make that, you take one step, he's going to take a step towards you as well. And I've seen the Lord do that time after time. And the goal is to continue that process in our lives forever.
Great info for all of us to consider. So thank you so much, sincerely, for taking the time to answer my questions, to share. We certainly hope everyone listening enjoyed it. They were maybe fed by some parts, maybe thought-provoking other parts, enjoyable other parts.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate the chance to chat a little bit today. And all the young people obviously are continually in our prayers. We recognize the challenges that are in front of them. And it's not easy. It's not an easy day in time. And yet the Lord's promises remain unchanged. So appreciate everyone's prayers and love you. And thanks for the opportunity. God bless.
You can connect with the GMBA on YouTube, all major podcast platforms, and Instagram. There are links in the description. Make sure to like and subscribe, leave a comment, and share this with someone you know. Thank you.